This is week 4, video 5. We'll talk about colonialism now so that we can talk about post-colonialism and its effects on anthropology in the next video. To be honest, I sort of confuse imperialism and colonialism, so I just put them together with a slash in between, and so can you. I won't ask you to break these apart and tell me the differences. To me, they're kind of the same thing. I guess the standard dictionary definition of imperialism is the policy of extending the rule of an empire over other societies. I think imperialism tends to be more economic, and colonialism is more of a long-term, it seems to me, political and economic domination of a territory or people by a foreign power, often through establishing settlements. Let's just look a little bit at the scope of colonialism. European colonialism, that is. So here's a map from 1900, and as you can see, let's look at Great Britain, the kind of pink portions. So in 1900, Great Britain is the colonizing power of Canada, of a huge portion of like the middle part of Africa, as well as some of West Africa, Australia, South Asia, parts of the South Pacific. And so, take some time and look at France also as a big power that we'll talk about. So in 1914, the British had control of 1/5 of the world's land surface and 1/4 of the world's population. Just think about that, this tiny island nation. 1/5 of the world's land surface, 1/4 of the world's population. Unbelievable. They operated on a kind of ideology they called the white man's burden, and it was this idea that people can't govern themselves, so the British must do it for them. It's our burden as the British. We're taking this on so that we can help the world. And you can imagine thinking about this at the time and how this fits so well with theories of social evolution and social Darwinism. And the British, they had different forms of colonialism, and some involved actually settling the country with British citizens, and others took a more sort of distant approach, maybe more imperial forms that didn't involve so much a movement of the British into the country. French colonialism, it's harder to see when it's millions, but also we can see in 1914 they had control over a large portion of the world's population and landmass. And they had a similar ideology, mission civilisatrice, the civilizing mission, this idea that, we're going to civilize people by giving them the gift of French culture, language, and religion. French culture, language, and religion is the best. It's superior to all others. So we're going to civilize, and think about this again in terms of social evolution, and the idea of leading peoples, societies, towards civilization, at least the French version of it. French colonialism also took the form of direct and indirect rule. So even in Morocco and Algeria, two countries side by side, both colonized by the French. In Algeria, the French directly colonized Algeria, and they annexed it as part of France and moved a great portion of the French population there. Next door in Morocco, they ruled as what they called a protectorate. They kept the Moroccan king on the throne and ruled through him, and they saw themselves as having a little bit more of a hands-off approach. And these forms had very different ramifications for the ending of the colonial period and the ways that the Moroccans and Algerians responded to colonialism. The end of colonialism was much bloodier in Algeria. So there are all kinds of other colonialisms and imperialisms we can talk about. Within Europe, we could talk about Spain and Portugal, but elsewhere in the world, the Chinese have been colonizers, the Japanese have been colonizers. There have been various forms of African colonization. In fact, one of them listed below is Egyptian, and there's a wonderful book talking about how at the same time the British were colonizing Egypt was colonizing Sudan. So sometimes there were sort of layers of colonialism. Certainly, we can talk about the Soviet Union as a colonial imperial force. And then there was the Ottoman Empire, which is today Turkey. So, why do we really talk about European colonialism when we talk about colonialism? I think we can guess some of the reasons for that. We're in the American Academy, and so maybe that's the example closest to home.